The forbidden archives have existed for centuries, hidden in shadowed chambers, secret libraries, and private collections, far from the public eye. Their origins are as mysterious as the knowledge they contain. Ancient civilizations, monastic scribes, Renaissance scholars, and secret societies all contributed to these repositories, safeguarding knowledge that was deemed too dangerous, too powerful, or too radical to be revealed. Within their walls are manuscripts, codices, and maps that whisper secrets long suppressed. Histories that contradict the official narratives, advanced technologies lost to time, mystical philosophies that challenge the mind, and spiritual wisdom meant only for the prepared. Access to these texts was never granted lightly. Custodians of the archives understood that knowledge is a double-edged sword, capable of illuminating the world or igniting chaos if mishandled. Alchemical treatises, mystical manuscripts, historical chronicles, and scientific works all shared one common thread. They demanded discernment, patience, and moral responsibility. In coded language, cryptic diagrams, and allegorical storytelling ensured that only those capable of comprehension could approach the deeper truths contained within. The archives were not merely storage spaces for forgotten knowledge. They were living instruments of power. They connected generations of scholars, explorers, and initiates across centuries, each contributing to a continuum of preservation and understanding. They reflected both human curiosity and caution, capturing the tension between revelation and concealment. And for those who dared to glimpse their contents, the forbidden archives offered a tantalizing, almost forbidden promise: the chance to confront truths long hidden, to peer behind the veil of history, and to enter a world where knowledge was both a treasure and a test. The centuries-old purpose of the forbidden archives was clear: to protect humanity from knowledge that could destabilize the world while preserving wisdom that might one day illuminate it. Across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, secret chambers and private libraries were carefully maintained, often hidden behind ordinary walls, disguised as mundane bookshelves, or buried beneath monasteries. Access was tightly controlled, limited to trusted scholars, aristocrats, and initiates who demonstrated the discipline, intellect, and ethical awareness to engage responsibly with the texts. Within these archives were alchemical manuscripts exploring the transformation of matter and consciousness, mystical treatises on hidden cosmologies and spiritual ascension, historical chronicles contradicting official records, and early scientific works describing principles far ahead of their time. Each text carried warnings and codes, guiding the reader and testing their readiness. Misinterpretation could lead to failure, disillusionment, or even danger, while careful study could unlock profound insight. The archives were thus both repositories and mentors, challenging those who entered to grow intellectually, ethically, and spiritually. The networks surrounding the archives were intricate and secretive. Knowledge traveled slowly, often conveyed through coded letters, trusted intermediaries, or oral instruction. Manuscripts were copied carefully, sometimes disguised within ordinary volumes or hidden behind elaborate ciphers. The custodians understood that the consequences of revelation were immense. A single text falling into the wrong hands could disrupt politics, religion, or society itself. Yet they also recognized that knowledge had its time and place. By controlling access and preserving context, the forbidden archives ensured that humanity could one day confront and understand truths too powerful to be revealed too soon. As the sun set over the Mediterranean, casting long shadows across marble forums and cobbled streets, the city of Rome held within its walls a secret that few outside its inner sanctums could even imagine. The empire, for all its grandeur, its legions, and its laws, was not only built on conquest and trade, but also on the careful control of knowledge. Within the palaces and temples, in hidden chambers beneath basilicas and villas, lay records and manuscripts that the common citizen would never see. Accounts of wars, treaties, prophecies, and histories that, if revealed, could shift the balance of power. These were the shadow libraries of Rome, archives that recorded not only what was but what might have been. The Roman elite understood an immutable truth: information is power. A single document could undermine an emperor, expose a conspiracy, or reveal secrets of the gods themselves. Among these archives were military logs so precise that they could reconstruct campaigns year by year, soldier by soldier. There were records of negotiations with foreign kings, treaties signed in secrecy, and edicts meant to be known only to a select few. The common population believed in the majesty of Rome, but the true machinery of the empire was powered by secrecy. Behind the grandeur of the Senate and the pomp of the triumph, these hidden texts guided decisions, shaped strategy, and ensured the longevity of a civilization. Some of the most tantalizing contents of Rome's secret archives were the Sibylline books, ancient prophecies guarded jealously by the priests known as the Quindecimviri. These texts were said to contain visions of the future, warnings from the gods, and instructions for averting disasters. Each reading of the prophecies was closely monitored, and the books themselves were kept under lock and key, consulted only in times of dire need. To the average Roman, these were sacred instruments of divine guidance. To the elite, they were tools of political power. Misinterpretation or exposure of their contents could spark chaos. Yet when carefully employed, they reinforced the authority of the ruling class, binding religion and governance in a careful, controlled balance. But the secrecy extended far beyond prophecy. Rome's hidden archives contained records of conquered peoples, histories that were deliberately altered or suppressed to strengthen the narrative of imperial dominance. Manuscripts detailing the customs, beliefs, and knowledge of subjugated cultures were sometimes kept intact, sometimes edited, and sometimes destroyed entirely. These records were double-edged. They offered insight into potential threats, alliances, and rebellions, yet their preservation demanded discretion. The scribes who copied and maintained these documents understood that their work was not merely clerical, but profoundly political. Each carefully penned line could shape how future generations would interpret the past, controlling the legacy of Rome itself. In addition to military and political records, there were texts that modern scholars would consider radical, even heretical. Accounts of natural phenomena, early philosophical treatises, and studies of the human body, sometimes informed by Eastern knowledge brought back through trade or conquest, were stored in secret chambers. Rome, like earlier civilizations, understood the danger of knowledge in the wrong hands. Innovations in medicine, engineering, and astronomy were closely guarded, often limited to the educated elite, because to release such information indiscriminately could destabilize traditional hierarchies, challenge religious orthodoxy, or inspire dissent. Knowledge in Rome was not just power, it was control incarnate. Beyond the city itself, in villas and estates across the empire, wealthy patricians maintained private libraries that contained rare scrolls and codices brought from Egypt, Greece, and the Near East. Some of these collections contained texts that had survived centuries of suppression, including fragments of pre-Roman knowledge that scholars today still debate. These private archives were often more dangerous than state libraries, for while the Senate and emperor controlled official knowledge, the elite could pursue forbidden lines of inquiry, experiment with radical ideas, or engage with philosophies that the general populace or even other members of the ruling class would find unsettling. The threat, however, was not always overt. It was subtle, a quiet influence, shaping thought and power from behind closed doors. The destruction and concealment of certain documents were just as significant as their preservation. When a text challenged the official narrative, when it revealed truths inconvenient to the empire, it was often quietly erased. Rome's shadow libraries, in this sense, were curated with the precision of an artist and the ruthlessness of a strategist. Manuscripts might vanish without a trace, scrolls might be locked in inaccessible vaults, and entire accounts of history could be rewritten in silence. This careful balance between revelation and suppression allowed Rome not only to survive, but to dominate for centuries, crafting a history that justified conquest, law, and imperial order while quietly hiding the complexities that might weaken its authority. Yet, even in secrecy, there were those who sought to uncover what was hidden. Scholars, scribes, and ambitious politicians risked their lives to glimpse forbidden manuscripts, and sometimes succeeded. Letters recount the discovery of texts that challenged popular understandings of religion or history, but these were often buried again, either by decree or by circumstance. The process of discovery and suppression became cyclical, a rhythm that repeated across centuries. Knowledge was created, hoarded, concealed, and occasionally revealed, only to be hidden once more. It is in this shadowy interplay between secrecy and revelation that the true power of Rome's hidden archives becomes apparent. They were not just repositories of information. They were instruments for shaping thought, manipulating belief, and guiding the course of empires. They remind us that history, as we know it, is rarely a simple chronicle of events. It is the product of choices about what to preserve and what to hide, of decisions about which truths the world is ready to see and which must remain in the shadows. To imagine Rome without its shadow libraries is to imagine a tree stripped of its roots. The visible triumphs, the architecture, the conquests, even the laws, gain a different meaning when one considers the unseen texts that quietly influenced every decision. The power of Rome was not only in the sword, the Senate, or the spectacle of its cities, but in its ability to control information, to decide what history should know and what it should never learn. And it is in this understanding that we begin to glimpse the origins of a tradition that stretches far beyond Rome itself, one that would echo through the darkened vaults of the medieval monasteries, the secretive chambers of religious orders, and eventually into the forbidden archives we seek to uncover today. The fall of Rome left a silence that stretched across Europe like a shadow, dark and unbroken. Once bustling cities were abandoned, their streets empty, their forums cracked and overgrown, their libraries left to decay beneath the weight of time. What remained of the empire's vast knowledge, its military logs, philosophical treatises, maps of lands both known and unknown, was scattered, stolen, or deliberately hidden. The collapse did not simply erase the empire, it fractured its memory. The centuries that followed have often been labeled the Dark Ages, a time of ignorance and superstition, yet the truth is far more complex. In the quiet, behind the walls of monasteries and private estates, knowledge was being guarded, preserved, and sometimes altered in ways that would ripple through history. When the legions withdrew, they left not only empty cities, but also a vacuum of authority. Into this void stepped new custodians of knowledge, monks, abbots, and religious scholars who understood the immense responsibility that had been thrust upon them. They became the gatekeepers of what survived, collecting fragments of Roman texts, Greek philosophy, and even older writings from distant lands. Some of these texts were meticulously copied and preserved, while others were edited or redacted, often to align with religious orthodoxy or moral instruction. History, it seemed, was no longer merely recorded. It was curated, shaped, and in some cases, rewritten entirely. The monastic scribes worked in quiet isolation, their lives a balance of devotion, scholarship, and secrecy. The scriptoriums where they labored were dimly lit, filled with the scent of ink, parchment, and candle smoke. Each stroke of the pen was deliberate, each manuscript a sacred responsibility. Yet these quiet halls also held a subtle power, the ability to decide what knowledge should survive and what should vanish. A monk could choose to omit a page, to interpret a passage in a certain way, or to preserve a text in a hidden vault. In doing so, he shaped not only the intellectual life of his community, but the very framework of European civilization. Some scholars speculate that this careful curation created gaps in history, moments deliberately obscured, and truths that would only resurface centuries later. Beyond the monastery walls, Europe itself was in flux. Kingdoms rose and fell, borders shifted, and the knowledge of Rome that had once flowed freely through the empire's vast networks became isolated in pockets of preservation. Some texts were transported along rivers and trade routes, others buried beneath crypts or hidden in stone chambers. The fragility of survival meant that each manuscript, each tablet, was a treasure, a relic of an age that the new rulers often neither understood nor appreciated. The scarcity of knowledge made secrecy a necessity, not only for safety, but for the continuity of civilization itself. But this silence was not absolute. Even as monasteries became sanctuaries for forgotten texts, whispers of suppressed knowledge traveled quietly among scholars and travelers. Tales of lost Roman engineering, of philosophical debates that questioned divine order, of maps showing lands unknown, persisted in rumor and oral tradition. These whispers became the seeds of mystery that would later inspire secret societies, clandestine scholars, and those who sought forbidden wisdom. They remind us that even in times of apparent darkness, knowledge was not entirely extinguished. It simply passed into hiding, waiting for those capable of uncovering it. And yet, there is a darker side to this preservation. While monasteries saved the knowledge that might have otherwise been lost, they also controlled it, selecting what could be copied, studied, or shared. Texts deemed dangerous or heretical were concealed or destroyed, leaving gaps that would haunt historians for centuries. The records of pagan philosophy, certain medical texts, even accounts of natural phenomena inconsistent with religious doctrine were often suppressed. The result was a delicate tension, preservation intertwined with suppression, the survival of knowledge dependent on discretion and discretion dependent on obedience. The very act of keeping these texts alive carried with it the responsibility to control, to shape, and to protect, sometimes at the expense of full truth. This tension between secrecy and survival created what modern scholars often call the dark gap in history. There are moments when entire civilizations seem to vanish from record, not because they ceased to exist, but because their knowledge was hidden away, inaccessible to the wider world. Documents that might have illuminated the daily life, beliefs, and discoveries of these times were quietly stored or destroyed. What remains is fragmentary, tantalizing, and sometimes contradictory, giving us glimpses of the past while keeping its deepest secrets firmly concealed. It is in these centuries that the foundations of later, forbidden archives were laid. The practices of concealment, selective preservation, and controlled dissemination became ingrained in European intellectual culture. Monks and scholars, acting with devotion or fear, ensured that only those deemed worthy could access certain knowledge. It was a time when ideas were powerful, dangerous even, and where the consequences of exposure could be severe: exile, execution, or accusations of heresy. The hidden archives of this period were not merely storage spaces. They were instruments of control, shaping both the understanding of the past and the trajectory of the future. And so, as we peer back into these early medieval centuries, we see more than darkness and decay. We see a civilization quietly preserving the bones of a lost world, selecting fragments of truth and hiding them behind walls of stone, faith, and secrecy. We see the careful, deliberate work of those who understood that knowledge could be as dangerous as fire, that one misplaced document could change the course of a kingdom or even a continent. In this silence, in these hidden vaults, the story of human curiosity and caution continues to unfold, laying the groundwork for the mysteries that would captivate future generations and inspiring the search for the forbidden archives that, centuries later, would begin to emerge from shadow. Beyond the crumbling cities and scattered remnants of fallen empires, a new guardianship arose, one cloaked in silence, devotion, and ritual. The monasteries of medieval Europe became the secret vaults of civilization, repositories of knowledge that had survived the collapse of Rome and the turbulent centuries that followed. These monastic communities, often isolated on hills, in valleys, or atop windswept cliffs, devoted themselves to copying, preserving, and protecting texts that could easily have been lost forever. Within their walls, ink met parchment in the flickering glow of candlelight, and every stroke of the quill carried the weight of centuries. The monks were not merely scribes. They were custodians of humanity's memory, operating in a delicate balance between devotion, scholarship, and secrecy. Step inside a monastic scriptorium, and the world feels suspended in time. The air is heavy with the scent of wet ink, wax, and old leather. Shelves stretch toward the ceiling, overflowing with scrolls, codices, and manuscripts of every size. Some texts are carefully bound in gold leaf, others in simple parchment, yet each is precious beyond measure. Here, the monks copy not only sacred scripture, but also philosophical treatises, scientific observations, medical texts, and even the occasional fragment of lost classical wisdom. Some of these documents, brought from distant lands or recovered from ruined libraries, contain ideas that could unsettle the established order, challenging doctrine, authority, or conventional belief. And so, they are hidden, cataloged meticulously, sometimes sealed behind locked doors or buried beneath layers of other manuscripts, accessible only to those deemed worthy. Yet preservation was not a purely altruistic endeavor. Monasteries were centers of power as much as they were centers of learning. By controlling access to these texts, abbots and senior monks wielded subtle influence over scholars, rulers, and even entire communities. A text could be used to guide political decisions, to resolve disputes, or to legitimize authority. Alteration was occasionally necessary, whether through careful editing or omission, to align the content with prevailing religious or moral frameworks. Some manuscripts were deliberately redacted, chapters removed, or footnotes added in code, ensuring that only the initiated could grasp the full meaning. In this way, the monastery became both a sanctuary and a gatekeeper, a place where knowledge was preserved but also carefully curated, filtered, and controlled. The contrast between what was preserved and what was lost is staggering. For every classical treatise meticulously copied, there were likely dozens more destroyed or hidden beyond retrieval. Texts considered heretical or dangerous, perhaps because they challenged theological interpretations, revealed inconvenient truths, or documented practices deemed occult, were often confined to locked chests, buried in hidden chambers, or burned entirely. Some of the most intriguing accounts hint at early scientific understanding, forbidden cosmologies, and philosophical ideas that contradicted mainstream religious teachings. These were not mere texts. They were seeds of knowledge that, if allowed to circulate freely, could have reshaped the intellectual landscape of Europe. The secrecy surrounding these monastic vaults also fostered a culture of coded communication and cryptic notation. Marginalia, shorthand, and symbolic imagery were often employed to conceal meaning from the uninitiated. A map might appear to be a simple drawing of a landscape, yet embedded within it could be directions to a hidden treasure, the location of a secret relic, or the path to a manuscript too dangerous to leave in plain sight. Even mathematical or astronomical notations could contain layers of hidden instruction, intelligible only to those trained to interpret them. This culture of encoding ensured that knowledge could survive while remaining inaccessible to the masses, a strategy that kept the power of information firmly within monastic control. Yet these walls were not impervious. The Middle Ages were not static. Kingdoms rose, invaded, and collapsed, and monasteries were not immune to the violence of the outside world. Some archives were looted during wars, their contents scattered across the continent, while others were carefully smuggled out to safer locations. Stories persist of texts buried beneath monastery floors, of secret chambers hidden behind false walls, of manuscripts transported under the cloak of night to ensure their survival. Every move was deliberate, every risk calculated, because the preservation of knowledge was not merely an academic pursuit. It was a sacred duty, a covenant with the past, present, and future. Within these walls, tension was constant. Monks knew that they were custodians of dangerous truths. Some texts hinted at alternative cosmologies, ancient technologies, or knowledge of lost civilizations. Others contained accounts of miracles, prophecies, or spiritual practices that could challenge the authority of kings, the church, or the prevailing social order. The act of copying, interpreting, or simply possessing these documents was fraught with peril. A misstep could lead to charges of heresy, confiscation of the texts, or even death. This created an atmosphere of quiet vigilance, where the acquisition and preservation of knowledge were inseparable from the need for secrecy. Despite the risks, these vaults became crucibles of discovery and innovation. Some manuscripts, once thought lost, reveal early understandings of astronomy, medicine, and mathematics, hinting at knowledge that may have been centuries ahead of its time. Others preserve the philosophical debates of antiquity, encoded in language and allegory to survive scrutiny. The archives of monasteries were not just storage spaces. They were laboratories of thought, incubators of ideas, and fortresses of memory. Within them, the past and the future intertwined, creating a continuum of hidden knowledge that shaped the intellectual evolution of Europe. It is within this delicate, shadowed world that the story of human curiosity continues. The monastery, with its quiet halls and hidden chambers, embodies a paradox. It is both a sanctuary for the mind and a cage for truth. Knowledge preserved here could illuminate, inspire, and transform, yet it was often kept from those unprepared to wield it responsibly. The monks, with their devotion and discipline, understood the duality of power and danger inherent in every manuscript. They knew that some truths were too potent, too transformative, or too disruptive to release freely. And so, the monastery became a silent stage for the ongoing struggle between revelation and suppression, a struggle that continues to echo through the hidden archives of the centuries. Through their labor, secrecy, and unwavering dedication, the monks ensured that the wisdom of past civilizations would survive the chaos of history. They became the guardians of a delicate flame, a flame that flickered in the darkness, waiting for the right hands to rekindle it. And in these dimly lit halls, amid the scent of old ink and candle smoke, we begin to see the enduring importance of hidden knowledge, the careful stewardship that allowed humanity to preserve its memory, and the seeds of mysteries that would one day emerge to challenge our understanding of the world. By the time the medieval world had settled into its rhythm of stone walls, monastic devotion, and feudal hierarchies, a new kind of secrecy had emerged, one more deliberate and potent than the mere preservation of texts. It was a secrecy born from fear, reverence, and an understanding that some knowledge carried consequences too dangerous to be shared openly. The Church, as the dominant authority in Europe, became both protector and censor, determining which writings were safe, which were heretical, and which were too potent to ever see the light of day. Among these were the forbidden books, manuscripts and codices that held truths the authorities believed could challenge faith, destabilize society, or unravel the carefully constructed tapestry of Christian doctrine. The forbidden books were not always obvious in their danger. Some appeared as philosophical treatises, perhaps recounting alternative interpretations of Scripture or detailing mystical practices that diverge from orthodoxy. Others were histories that contradicted the accepted narrative, accounts of events erased or rewritten to suit the Church's version of reality. Still others contained scientific observations, astrological calculations, or cosmological theories that, if disseminated widely, might challenge the authority of the clergy or the legitimacy of papal decrees. Each manuscript was carefully examined, and in many cases, silenced. To touch one was to walk the edge of peril. To read one without permission was to risk excommunication or worse. Among the most infamous were the Gnostic Gospels, a collection of texts that presented alternative views of Christ, divinity, and the creation of the world. They revealed teachings of early sects that diverged sharply from the canonical Gospels, often portraying knowledge and personal enlightenment as the path to salvation rather than obedience to a hierarchical church. Such ideas were deeply threatening, for they offered a spiritual independence that could undermine centuries of ecclesiastical authority. The Church responded not merely with censorship, but with systematic suppression, ensuring that these manuscripts were removed from circulation, hidden in vaults, or destroyed outright. The Book of Enoch, another forbidden text, provides a striking example of knowledge too powerful for ordinary use. It recounts visions, prophecies, and accounts of beings that fall from the heavens, touching on concepts of celestial power and cosmic order that could shake foundational beliefs. While fragments of Enoch survived in some monastic libraries, the book as a whole was carefully restricted, its contents glimpsed only by those who had been trained, initiated, and deemed worthy. Scholars speculate that its teachings influenced certain mystical traditions and secret societies, but the full scope of its impact remains tantalizingly hidden. The Church's suppression extended beyond individual texts to entire categories of knowledge. Alchemical treatises, which promised insights into the transformation of matter and the pursuit of immortality, were often condemned as heretical or dangerous. Astronomical and astrological works, capable of predicting events or mapping the cosmos in ways that challenge divine order, were confined to private collections or interpreted selectively by approved scholars. Even early medical texts, detailing remedies, procedures, or understanding of the human body, were sometimes restricted because their dissemination could conflict with spiritual teachings or the authority of licensed healers endorsed by the Church. This culture of suppression created a complex interplay between knowledge, secrecy, and power. To possess a forbidden text was not merely an academic matter. It was a moral and spiritual responsibility, a burden carried by those capable of understanding its weight. Many manuscripts were hidden behind coded language, symbolic imagery, or obscure allegories, accessible only to those trained in interpretation. Marginal notes, diagrams, and symbols were employed to obscure meaning, ensuring that a casual reader might see nothing more than a collection of words, while a careful scholar could discern profound secrets. In this way, the manuscripts themselves became puzzles, requiring intellect, devotion, and courage to unlock. Yet not all suppression was violent or punitive. Sometimes it was a matter of timing, of waiting for the world to be ready. Texts that were forbidden in one century might be cautiously circulated in another, their knowledge slowly trickling into the public sphere as cultural, political, or religious conditions permitted. In other cases, manuscripts were deliberately concealed for centuries, their secrets preserved in silence until rediscovery could spark revelation or upheaval. The Church's archives, private monastic libraries, and hidden vaults became the staging ground for a long game of knowledge management, where the decisions of a few shaped the intellectual and spiritual trajectory of Europe for generations. The tension between revelation and suppression was not lost on those who sought knowledge. Scholars, philosophers, and mystics often navigated a shadowy path, pursuing forbidden texts in secret while outwardly conforming to orthodoxy. Some traveled great distances, bribed scribes, or risked lives to access manuscripts kept in monasteries, private estates, or remote archives. Their discoveries could illuminate history, challenge prevailing beliefs, or inspire new philosophical, scientific, or spiritual movements. And yet, the fear of exposure lingered, for knowledge itself carried consequences as profound as the ideas it contained. It is striking to consider how much of the Church's suppressed knowledge has never been fully recovered. Manuscripts lost to fire, decay, or deliberate destruction leave tantalizing gaps in our understanding. Others survive in fragmentary form, their full contents glimpsed only through references, quotations, or coded allusions in other texts. Every rediscovered page, every fragment painstakingly reconstructed by modern scholars, provides not just information, but a glimpse into a world of thought that existed alongside, and often in tension, with mainstream history. Each recovered manuscript is a testament to the human desire to seek, preserve, and understand what was once forbidden. In many ways, the forbidden books symbolize the broader struggle between curiosity and control, between illumination and concealment. They remind us that the pursuit of knowledge has always been entwined with risk, that the acquisition of truth can challenge authority, disrupt society, and alter belief. And yet, they also reflect the human capacity for patience, reverence, and discretion, for understanding that some knowledge, if mishandled, can be as dangerous as it is enlightening. As we consider these forbidden texts, we begin to see the deeper patterns that stretch across centuries. The intentional hiding of dangerous knowledge, the careful curation of what could be seen, and the deliberate shaping of what would survive. This was not mere censorship. It was a philosophy of knowledge, a recognition that information is both power and peril, and that the consequences of revelation could be far-reaching. Within the vaults of monasteries, within the secret chambers of the Church, and in the shadowy corridors of private collections, history was being written not only in words, but in omission, concealment, and protection. The story of the forbidden books is thus inseparable from the story of human civilization itself. They are the silent witnesses to a world in which knowledge could elevate or destroy, liberate or control. They are the hidden voices of philosophers, mystics, and scholars whose insights were deemed too potent for the masses. And they are a reminder that even in a world ruled by dogma, hierarchy, and authority, the flame of curiosity endured, flickering quietly in candlelit scriptoriums, waiting for those courageous enough to seek it out and daring enough to read. By the late Middle Ages, Europe was a continent on the cusp of transformation. Yet beneath the surface of bustling towns and fortified cities, a shadowy network of knowledge continued to operate in silence. The monasteries had long preserved what the world had nearly lost, but the rise of universities, the movement of scholars, and the increasing circulation of manuscripts created both opportunity and danger. Within this changing landscape, forbidden knowledge became both more coveted and more vulnerable, drawing the attention of those who sought power, influence, or enlightenment beyond the confines of conventional authority. The stakes had never been higher, for to possess a hidden manuscript could mean not only prestige but also peril. Across the cities of Florence, Paris, and Prague, scholars began to rediscover fragments of classical texts, long hidden or misinterpreted. Greek and Roman works that had survived only in monastic libraries were brought back into the intellectual discourse, carefully studied, and sometimes copied in secret. The Renaissance was, in many ways, a flowering of what had survived the centuries of suppression. Yet even as ideas spread, there remained texts and traditions deliberately withheld from the public eye. These forbidden manuscripts contained knowledge that challenged dogma, proposed alternative cosmologies, or explored mystical and alchemical practices that seemed to flirt with the divine and the forbidden alike. The tension between revelation and concealment had shifted into a subtle, high-stakes dance. It is within this context that secret societies began to emerge, groups dedicated not merely to worship, politics, or philosophy, but to the preservation, interpretation, and controlled dissemination of hidden knowledge. The Hermeticists, Rosicrucians, and later the more famous alchemical circles operated in shadows, their members sworn to secrecy. Initiates were often required to demonstrate intellectual rigor, spiritual maturity, and moral discernment before being allowed access to texts that could profoundly alter their understanding of the world. These societies became custodians of the forbidden, ensuring that certain wisdom survived while remaining inaccessible to the unprepared. To outsiders, they were mysterious, sometimes feared, often misunderstood, yet their influence quietly shaped the intellectual currents of Europe. Among the most fascinating examples of this hidden network were the alchemical manuscripts, which combined mystical philosophy with the study of matter. To the untrained eye, these texts might appear to be simple instructions for turning base metals into gold, yet their true purpose often extended far beyond material wealth. Encoded within their symbols and allegories were concepts of transformation, spiritual ascent, and the pursuit of hidden truths that transcended conventional understanding. The careful concealment of these texts was a form of protection, a recognition that such knowledge, if misused or misunderstood, could lead to ruin, obsession, or chaos. Those who read these texts without proper guidance risked more than their reputation. They risked their minds, their spirits, and in some cases, their very lives. The manuscripts of the Renaissance were also repositories of alternative histories, histories that contradicted the narratives sanctioned by kings, popes, or emperors. They contained accounts of ancient civilizations, secret lineages, and events deliberately erased from mainstream memory. Some hinted at advanced knowledge lost in cataclysms, at technologies or understandings that exceeded the capabilities of contemporary Europe. Maps, often encoded or symbolically drawn, depicted lands that had vanished from common knowledge or civilizations that had been erased from collective memory. To encounter such a document was to touch the edge of forbidden possibility, to confront the realization that the official record might be incomplete or deliberately altered. The Church, ever vigilant, did not ignore these currents. Inquisition records, edicts, and correspondence reveal a deep concern with controlling access to dangerous ideas. Alchemy, astrology, certain strands of philosophy, and mystical practices were carefully monitored, and those suspected of possessing forbidden texts were often interrogated, excommunicated, or worse. This climate of surveillance created an underground of knowledge, where manuscripts moved in secret, traded among trusted scholars and initiates. The tension between discovery and suppression, between the pursuit of enlightenment and the risk of persecution, defined an entire era of intellectual history. It is also during this period that printing began to transform the possibilities of knowledge dissemination. While the invention of movable type promised unprecedented access to books and learning, it also intensified the Church's anxiety over uncontrolled knowledge. Printed texts could spread rapidly, challenging authority and tradition in ways previously unimaginable. Yet even in this era of innovation, forbidden texts persisted in secret. Manuscripts copied by hand, encoded, hidden in private libraries, or transported across borders to evade scrutiny. The interplay between technology and secrecy demonstrates a paradox that has persisted throughout history. Knowledge is always at risk, yet finds a way to endure, often through the most discreet and unexpected channels. Some scholars, working at the edges of these networks, became adept at reading between the lines, interpreting coded symbols, marginal notes, and allegorical diagrams to extract hidden meaning. They were the detectives of the intellectual world, piecing together fragments of suppressed knowledge to form larger patterns. In many cases, these discoveries inspired further secrecy, as those who understood the power of the information sought to protect it from misuse or persecution. The cycle of concealment, discovery, and guarded dissemination continued, a hidden current flowing beneath the apparent calm of Renaissance Europe. Yet the allure of forbidden knowledge was irresistible. Artists, scientists, and philosophers alike were drawn to these hidden texts, finding in them inspiration, challenge, and even transcendence. Leonardo da Vinci, often described as a polymath ahead of his time, studied manuscripts and codices that contained knowledge of anatomy, engineering, and natural phenomena far beyond conventional understanding. His notebooks reveal a mind attuned to the hidden layers of the world, the intersections of art, science, and secret wisdom. While we may never know the full extent of the texts he consulted, his work offers a glimpse into how forbidden knowledge could shape creativity, discovery, and understanding. This era, rich with both discovery and danger, sets the stage for the later hidden archives that would accumulate over centuries, repositories of texts so potent that even their existence was often concealed. It is here, amid the candle-lit scriptoriums, the secret societies, and the whispered conversations in hidden chambers, that the seeds of the forbidden archives we seek to uncover were planted. Knowledge had survived Rome, the Dark Ages, and the initial flowering of the Renaissance, but it remained fragile, fragmented, and shrouded in secrecy. The struggle between revelation and suppression, between curiosity and caution, had become an enduring feature of human history. And so we see, in the quiet corridors of Renaissance Europe, the same tension that had guided civilizations from Sumer to Rome to the monasteries of the medieval period. The forbidden books, alchemical treatises, coded maps, and suppressed histories were more than relics. They were living instruments of influence, shaping thought, society, and belief in ways that remain visible only through careful, patient study. Each manuscript preserved, each fragment hidden, was a link in a chain stretching across centuries, connecting the past to the present, the known to the unknown, the seen to the hidden. As the Renaissance gave way to the early modern period, the world seemed to awaken, a continent reborn in curiosity, exploration, and intellectual ambition. Yet beneath the surface of this enlightenment, the currents of secrecy that had persisted for centuries continued to flow, shaping discoveries, guiding thought, and guarding knowledge too potent for ordinary eyes. The rise of powerful monarchies, the spread of printing, and the expansion of trade routes created unprecedented opportunities for the movement of information, but also heightened the perceived danger of uncontrolled knowledge. The forbidden archives, the hidden repositories of manuscripts, codices, and relics, now became more than sanctuaries of preservation. They were weapons, treasures, and instruments of influence, their secrets coveted by scholars, clergy, and rulers alike. Imagine a dimly lit chamber, deep beneath the stone floors of a castle or monastery. The air is cool, tinged with the scent of old parchment and the faint trace of candle smoke. Tall shelves stretch upward, burdened with the weight of manuscripts and scrolls, some carefully cataloged, others stacked haphazardly in the urgency of concealment. Each text is more than mere writing. It is a key, a fragment of knowledge that could illuminate the cosmos, reveal hidden technologies, or challenge deeply held beliefs. The very act of opening one of these volumes is an act of courage, a willingness to confront the unknown, to wrest secrets from centuries of silence. In this era, the balance between revelation and suppression reached new levels of sophistication. Monarchs and religious authorities were acutely aware that knowledge could determine power. A single manuscript might contain a genealogy of noble bloodlines that undermined a king's claim, an astrological chart predicting war or plague, or a historical account contradicting official histories. To control access was to control fate. Vaults and hidden rooms were carefully constructed, often with multiple layers of security. False walls, secret compartments, and coded instructions ensured that only those deemed worthy, or those willing to risk everything, could access the most sensitive texts. The emergence of the printing press introduced a new dimension of risk and opportunity. For the first time, text could be multiplied, circulated, and disseminated far more easily than ever before. The Church, already vigilant, now faced an unprecedented challenge. Printed books could spread heretical ideas, radical philosophies, or forbidden knowledge to a far wider audience. In response, censorship intensified. Indexes of prohibited books, inquisitorial oversight, and licensing systems were established to monitor and restrict access. Yet, as history has shown, the very act of suppression only increased the allure of forbidden texts. Scholars, merchants, and clandestine networks found ways to circulate knowledge surreptitiously, smuggling manuscripts, printing copies secretly, and communicating ideas through code, allegory, and symbol. Among the most coveted texts of this period were the alchemical treatises, which promised not only the transformation of metals, but also the transformation of a human spirit. Alchemy, more than a proto-science, was a philosophy, a method of understanding the hidden structures of reality. Its practitioners often encoded their knowledge in intricate symbols, allegories, and diagrams that could only be interpreted by those initiated into the tradition. These texts, often hidden deep within monastic libraries or private collections, were regarded as dangerously powerful. To reveal their secrets recklessly was to risk obsession, spiritual peril, or social condemnation. And yet, their allure was irresistible to those seeking enlightenment beyond the limits of conventional learning. It was also a period when maps, charts, and travelogues became highly sensitive documents. Explorers brought back accounts of distant lands, peoples, and phenomena that challenged the familiar worldview of Europe. Some of these records were incorporated into public knowledge, while others were hidden, restricted to the eyes of kings, navigators, and trusted scholars. A map depicting unknown continents, natural resources, or strategic locations could shift the balance of power among competing empires. The secrecy surrounding such documents illustrates how the forbidden archives were not simply repositories of abstract knowledge. They were practical instruments of influence, capable of shaping politics, commerce, and imperial strategy. Mysticism and esoteric traditions also flourished in the shadows of this era. Hermetic texts, Kabbalistic treatises, and mystical manuscripts circulated quietly among select circles. Their contents range from meditative techniques and spiritual exercises to interpretations of cosmic order that could profoundly challenge conventional religious and scientific understanding. The keepers of these texts exercise caution, often teaching only by example, allegory, or oral instruction. In many cases, the manuscripts themselves served as both guides and tests, ensuring that only those prepared for the responsibility of knowledge could unlock its deeper meaning. The tension between secrecy and revelation was heightened by the political and religious turbulence of the period. Reformation, wars of succession, and the expansion of empires meant that control over information could decide the outcome of conflicts. Documents that might have seemed purely scholarly or spiritual often carried weighty political implications. A suppressed chronicle could justify rebellion or challenge a ruler's legitimacy. An encoded treatise could reveal military strategy or technological advantage. The management of knowledge became a delicate and deliberate practice, where every manuscript represented both risk and potential power. It is in this environment that the modern concept of the forbidden archives begins to crystallize. These were not merely collections of texts. They were living networks, evolving across centuries, connecting scholars, secret societies, and custodians of knowledge. Each text preserved a fragment of history, philosophy, or science that had been deemed too dangerous, controversial, or revolutionary to circulate freely. The careful layering of concealment, the use of codes, and the deliberate cultivation of mystery ensured that these manuscripts would survive even when empires fell, wars raged, or institutions changed. As we look back from the present, we see that the forbidden archives of the early modern period were more than relics. They were instruments of continuity. They carried the intellectual and spiritual inheritance of civilizations long past, linking the wisdom of antiquity to the discoveries of the Renaissance and the cautious curiosity of emerging modern scholars. In their quiet, hidden chambers, humanity's deepest questions were preserved, patiently awaiting those who would come to read, to interpret, and to understand. These archives, layered with secrecy and reverence, remind us that history is never simply the story of what is recorded publicly. History is shaped by what is hidden, what is preserved in shadows, and what is revealed only to those who seek it with care and courage. In the candlelit vaults, among manuscripts that whisper across centuries, the past and the future converge. They invite us to consider not only what has been lost, but what remains, waiting for discovery, ready to challenge our understanding of the world and the knowledge we take for granted. By the 17th century, the Forbidden Archives had grown into something far more complex than a collection of hidden texts. They were now living networks of knowledge, dispersed across monasteries, private estates, universities, and the chambers of the powerful. Each repository contained fragments of ancient wisdom, philosophical treatises, mystical texts, alchemical instructions, coded maps, and historical accounts deliberately concealed from the public eye. The custodians of these collections understood their dual responsibility: to preserve knowledge and to protect it from misuse. This duality defined an era when curiosity and caution existed in constant tension, and the very act of uncovering a manuscript could alter the course of history. Europe was in turmoil, its intellectual landscape expanding rapidly while social and political unrest grew. The 30 Years' War, religious schisms, and the rise of absolute monarchies created a volatile environment in which information became both a tool and a weapon. A single manuscript, if revealed to the wrong person, could incite rebellion, justify conquest, or delegitimize authority. Conversely, the careful application of such knowledge could grant power, influence, and insight beyond measure. It is within this crucible of tension that the most significant and secretive manuscripts of the age circulated, carefully guarded, often encoded, and always shrouded in mystery. The alchemical and mystical texts of this period were particularly prized. Alchemists continued to pursue not only the transformation of metals, but also the transformation of the human soul. These manuscripts combined philosophical reflection, chemical experimentation, and spiritual practice in ways that were coded and symbolic. To the uninitiated, an alchemical diagram might appear as a confusing mix of animals, geometric shapes, and Latin inscriptions, yet each element held layered meaning. Initiates learned to decipher these codes, understanding that the manuscripts were designed as both instruction and test, revealing profound truths only to those patient, disciplined, and morally prepared. The Hermetic tradition also reached a new level of sophistication. Texts derived from Egyptian, Greek, and Near Eastern sources circulated quietly among learned scholars and secret societies. They contained insights into cosmic order, spiritual ascent, and the hidden forces that shape reality. These texts were rarely copied openly and were often accompanied by letters or marginalia that offered guidance or clarification to a select reader. The challenge was not simply to access the manuscript, but to understand it in context, to navigate the layers of symbolism, and to avoid misinterpretation, which could be both dangerous and spiritually destabilizing. Historical manuscripts continued to play a crucial role in the forbidden archives. Chronicles, genealogies, and travel accounts were often rewritten, redacted, or suppressed to favor the narrative of the powerful. Entire events could be omitted from official histories, while hidden records preserved the truth for those who sought it. Some manuscripts hinted at advanced knowledge from lost civilizations, including technologies, astronomical understanding, and philosophical ideas that challenged contemporary assumptions. These texts, often fragmented and encoded, created an intricate web of hidden knowledge stretching across time and geography, linking antiquity to the modern era. The circulation of these manuscripts was deliberate and clandestine. Scholars and collectors developed intricate networks to exchange, hide, and preserve texts, often relying on coded correspondence, secret meetings, or trusted intermediaries. In some cases, manuscripts were physically disguised, bound within innocuous volumes, or hidden in false compartments. Marginalia, cryptic diagrams, and symbolic imagery were used to obscure meaning, ensuring that only those trained in interpretation could extract the knowledge contained within. Every act of copying, sharing, or storing a manuscript was imbued with both reverence and caution, reflecting the high stakes of possession. This period also saw the emergence of intellectual espionage. Rulers, religious authorities, and ambitious scholars alike sought access to the most coveted manuscripts, recognizing the influence and power that could come from hidden knowledge. Agents and intermediaries were employed to track down manuscripts, acquire them through negotiation or subterfuge, and deliver them to trusted custodians. The act of safeguarding a manuscript could require a lifetime of vigilance, as the line between protection and theft was thin and often crossed in pursuit of knowledge. It is impossible to overstate the role of secrecy in shaping the intellectual landscape of this era. While some texts were preserved in visible libraries, accessible to a growing scholarly class, the most powerful knowledge remained intentionally hidden. Religious doctrine, political authority, and social order were intimately connected to control over information. Manuscripts that threatened these structures were suppressed, encoded, or concealed, while those that supported them were celebrated and widely disseminated. This dynamic created a tension between revelation and concealment that defined the early modern intellectual world, a tension that is central to understanding the forbidden archives. Maps and navigational charts were also central to these hidden collections. The age of exploration had expanded Europe's geographic horizons, but knowledge of distant lands, trade routes, and potential resources was a closely guarded commodity. Maps were encoded, disguised, or circulated only to trusted captains, merchants, or scholars. A map depicting a hidden harbor, uncharted islands, or strategic passage could shift the balance of power between nations, making its secrecy a matter of survival. The intersection of exploration, commerce, and forbidden knowledge created a web of intrigue in which manuscripts were as valuable as armies or fleets. Scientific texts were similarly controlled. Works on astronomy, physics, anatomy, and medicine often contained insights that challenged prevailing beliefs, from the structure of the cosmos to the understanding of human anatomy. Scholars who studied these manuscripts in secret risked persecution, excommunication, or accusations of heresy. Yet their discoveries laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution, showing that forbidden knowledge could be both dangerous and transformative. The careful custodianship of these texts ensured that knowledge survived to influence future generations, even when access remained tightly controlled. The forbidden archives in the 17th century were therefore not static repositories, but dynamic networks of knowledge, preservation, and secrecy. They connected scholars across borders, linked the intellectual efforts of centuries, and maintained a delicate balance between revelation and concealment. They remind us that history is not merely the record of what was publicly written, but also the sum of what was hidden suppressed, or selectively preserved. Each manuscript, codex, or fragment is a window into a world where knowledge was both power and peril, shaping not only thought but the course of civilization itself. And so, in the quiet chambers beneath monasteries, in the secret rooms of palaces, and in the hidden libraries of scholars, the story of human curiosity and secrecy continued. The manuscripts, carefully guarded and often encoded, were more than relics of the past. They were instruments of continuity, linking the wisdom of ancient civilizations to the discoveries, revolutions, and transformations of the modern world. The forbidden archives existed not only to preserve knowledge, but to control it, to protect it, and, when the time was right, to reveal it to those capable of understanding its depth and significance. By the 18th century, the forbidden archives had transformed from secret collections of scattered manuscripts into more organized, almost institutionalized networks of hidden knowledge. Europe was entering an age of enlightenment, a period celebrated for reason, scientific discovery, and the questioning of authority. Yet even amidst this intellectual flowering, the careful guardianship of dangerous knowledge persisted. The very manuscripts that fueled the curiosity of scholars, philosophers, and scientists were often censored, concealed, or encoded. What the public could access was carefully curated. What the learned could glimpse required trust, discretion, and sometimes daring. In this way, the forbidden archives continued to operate in parallel with mainstream history, quietly preserving secrets that might have reshaped the world if revealed too early. The content of these archives had expanded beyond religious, philosophical, and alchemical texts to include the early scientific discoveries that challenged traditional doctrine. Astronomical treatises hinted at a heliocentric universe long before it was widely accepted. Medical manuscripts revealed anatomy, surgical procedures, and experimental remedies that were centuries ahead of mainstream practice. Engineering texts detailed inventions, mechanical principles, and waterworks designs that, if widely disseminated, could have accelerated technological progress dramatically. Yet all of these manuscripts were often confined to hidden chambers, accessed only by those who could demonstrate not just intellect, but moral responsibility, as the potential misuse of knowledge was seen as dangerous to society, faith, and authority. The Enlightenment also brought a new dimension of secrecy, the growing networks of private collectors and learned societies. Aristocrats, scholars, and ambitious thinkers created their own hidden libraries, drawing from the monasteries, the estates of deceased scholars, and the rare manuscripts that had survived earlier centuries of suppression. These private collections were carefully guarded, sometimes physically, often symbolically. Access was granted to the trusted few who could interpret complex texts, understand coded symbols, and respect the fragile nature of knowledge. To possess such manuscripts was both an honor and a responsibility, for they represented the cumulative wisdom of centuries, from ancient civilizations to Renaissance polymaths, all carefully curated by generations of caretakers. Maps and navigational documents gained unprecedented significance in this period. European empires were expanding across the globe, exploring new continents, and encountering civilizations previously unknown. Knowledge of strategic harbors, trade routes, and natural resources was tightly controlled, often encoded within charts that appeared to be ordinary maps. These documents were as much political tools as they were geographical guides. A navigator with access to a hidden port or a secret passage could alter the course of trade, exploration, and even warfare. The manuscripts of the Forbidden Archives were therefore not abstract collections. They were instruments of practical power, capable of influencing kingdoms, empires, and the unfolding history of continents. The alchemical and esoteric traditions that had persisted in the shadows for centuries also evolved. By this time, alchemy had become deeply intertwined with early chemistry, spiritual philosophy, and the pursuit of enlightenment. Manuscripts contained coded experiments, spiritual exercises, and symbolic diagrams, each requiring careful interpretation. These texts were not merely instructions, but challenges, demanding patience, intellect, and ethical judgment from their readers. To misinterpret a passage could result in failure, obsession, or social ostracism. The careful concealment of these manuscripts ensured that only those capable of understanding and applying their knowledge could access their secrets, preserving the integrity of the wisdom within. Religious and mystical manuscripts continued to hold profound influence within the Forbidden Archives. Early Kabbalistic works, Hermetic texts, and mystical treatises were preserved, often in private collections, to maintain their teachings for those capable of understanding their esoteric principles. These manuscripts explored cosmic order, spiritual transformation, and the hidden connections between the physical and metaphysical realms. They were written in a language that demanded careful interpretation, blending symbolism, allegory, and numerical codes. The custodians of these texts understood that revelation without comprehension could be dangerous, and thus the secrecy surrounding these works was as much about protection as it was about preservation. The archives of this era also reflect a broader understanding of the consequences of exposure. Knowledge was no longer considered inherently safe to disseminate. The guardians of these texts recognized that access could shift power, challenge authority, or disrupt social order. Manuscripts were therefore carefully controlled, their circulation limited to trusted scholars, initiated members of secret societies, or select aristocrats. Letters, marginalia, and annotations often guided the reader, providing a pathway through complex ideas without revealing more than what was deemed safe. In this way, knowledge was layered, controlled, and disseminated according to a philosophy that balanced revelation with caution. The secrecy of these collections extended beyond Europe. Manuscripts and rare texts traveled across borders, sometimes smuggled through clandestine networks to avoid censorship or confiscation. Scholars risked imprisonment, exile, or even death to access or protect these works. The transmission of knowledge became a clandestine enterprise, a delicate negotiation between the preservation of wisdom and the dangers of discovery. Each manuscript was a thread connecting centuries of thought, linking ancient civilizations, medieval monasteries, Renaissance polymaths, and Enlightenment innovators in a fragile chain that had survived wars, plagues, and political upheaval. By the 18th century, the Forbidden Archives were therefore more than hidden libraries. They were living ecosystems of knowledge, evolving across centuries, linking scholars, philosophers, and seekers of truth. Each text, each fragment, each map or diagram was carefully curated to survive the perilous currents of history. Some manuscripts inspired scientific breakthroughs. Others preserved spiritual or philosophical insights that would not be fully understood until centuries later. The archives were a testament to the enduring human drive to seek, preserve, and protect knowledge, even when society, religion, or politics deemed it too dangerous to share. Ultimately, the 18th century Forbidden Archives remind us that history is never simply the story of what was recorded publicly. It is shaped as much by what was hidden, by what was carefully preserved in shadow, and by the decisions of those who understood the consequences of revelation. They are silent witnesses to a world in which knowledge was both a treasure and a threat, and their legacy continues to shape the search for understanding even today. They are more than repositories. They are guardians, puzzles, and warnings, waiting for those willing to uncover their secrets with patience, courage, and respect. By the late 18th century, the world of knowledge had become both more accessible and more perilous. Enlightenment ideals encouraged reason, empirical study, and the pursuit of science. Yet beneath this apparent openness, the Forbidden Archives remained a realm of shadows. Manuscripts that contained dangerous wisdom, knowledge capable of challenging authority, disrupting social hierarchies, or revealing truths long suppressed, continued to be carefully guarded. These were not idle relics. They were living instruments of influence, connecting generations of scholars, mystics, alchemists, and philosophers. Each manuscript preserved within these hidden vaults was a testament to centuries of careful stewardship, a relic of human curiosity intertwined with caution, reverence, and fear. The contents of the forbidden archives in this period were astonishingly diverse. Alchemical treatises, for example, had evolved beyond the transmutation of metals into gold. They now explored the transformation of consciousness, spiritual enlightenment, and the ethical responsibilities of knowledge. Symbolism, allegory, and cryptic diagrams were integral, ensuring that only those with the patience, intellect, and moral insight to decode them could access their full meaning. Each page was a labyrinth, a puzzle that demanded not just intellect, but discipline and spiritual awareness. To approach these texts recklessly was not merely a scholarly mistake. It could be dangerous, even ruinous. Religious and mystical manuscripts were equally guarded. Hermetic, Gnostic, and Kabbalistic texts explored hidden cosmologies, spiritual ascension, and metaphysical laws. The custodians of these works often restricted access to a few initiates, recognizing that the misuse or misunderstanding of such knowledge could provoke scandal, heresy accusations, or spiritual confusion. Marginalia, coded diagrams, and allegorical language created layers of concealment, ensuring that the manuscripts could survive centuries without revealing their full contents to the unprepared. Knowledge was both preserved and tested, a careful dance between revelation and protection. Historical texts within the archives offered equally compelling insights. Chronicles, genealogies, and travel accounts often contradicted official histories, revealing suppressed or forgotten events. Some manuscripts hinted at secret societies, lost civilizations, or advanced technologies that had disappeared from public memory. These fragments of history were dangerous precisely because they suggested that the official narratives, the versions sanctioned by kings, clergy, and scholars, were incomplete or manipulated. To possess, interpret, or reveal these texts was to engage with a history that had been deliberately hidden, to confront truths that challenged accepted authority. Scientific manuscripts were no less significant. Early works on astronomy, physics, medicine, and engineering often contained discoveries far ahead of their time. They challenged traditional ideas about the universe, the human body, and natural law. Access to such texts required secrecy, for the ideas they contained could provoke accusations of heresy or attract unwanted attention from authorities wary of intellectual disruption. Scholars who studied these texts in hidden chambers or private libraries were pioneers navigating a precarious balance between curiosity and caution. Their discoveries, preserved through secrecy, would eventually contribute to the scientific advances that define the modern world. The circulation of these manuscripts was deliberate and highly controlled. Trusted networks of scholars, aristocrats, and initiates facilitated the careful exchange of texts. Letters written in code, marginal annotations, and secret meetings were necessary to maintain the security of the archives. Some manuscripts were physically disguised, bound within ordinary books, or hidden in secret compartments. Others relied on symbolic and allegorical language to conceal meaning, readable only by those trained to interpret its subtleties. Each act of preservation, copying, or transmission was imbued with the awareness that knowledge could be as dangerous as it was valuable. Maps and navigational charts held a special place in the archives of this period. Exploration had expanded Europe's horizons, but knowledge of distant lands, hidden passages, and natural resources was intensely guarded. A map depicting a strategic harbor or a resource-rich region could alter the balance of power between nations or provide advantage to a single ruler. Such documents were carefully encoded, disguised, or circulated only among trusted individuals. They exemplify how the Forbidden Archives were not simply repositories of abstract knowledge, but practical tools of influence, able to shape commerce, politics, and conquest. The 17th and 18th centuries also saw the growth of private collections and societies dedicated to the acquisition and protection of rare texts. Aristocrats and scholars often cultivated libraries specifically to house manuscripts considered too dangerous or controversial for public access. These collections were meticulously organized, sometimes hidden behind secret doors, with access limited to those deemed capable of understanding and respecting their contents. The careful stewardship of such manuscripts created continuity across centuries, linking ancient civilizations, medieval monastic preservation, Renaissance curiosity, and Enlightenment scholarship in a hidden web of knowledge. Alchemical and mystical manuscripts, in particular, embodied a philosophy of secrecy. Their custodians understood that knowledge was a double-edged sword. It could enlighten and empower, but in the wrong hands, it could corrupt, mislead, or destroy. Caution dictated the careful selection of readers, the use of cryptic language, and a reliance on oral instruction or mentorship. The manuscripts themselves became both guides and tests, requiring intellectual rigor, moral discernment, and spiritual awareness. They were less about the acquisition of information and more about cultivating wisdom, the kind that requires patience, reflection, and ethical responsibility. The Forbidden Archives also reflect a broader understanding of human curiosity and ambition. Scholars, explorers, and philosophers were driven not merely by the pursuit of knowledge, but by the recognition of its potential to influence, disrupt, and transform. Access to a single manuscript could inspire a scientific breakthrough, reveal a hidden truth about history, or suggest a new philosophy of life. Yet such discoveries were always shadowed by risk, the possibility of persecution, censorship, or even death. The careful management of manuscripts, the coded language, and the secret networks ensured that knowledge survived while remaining contained until the world was ready to receive it. By the late 18th century, the Forbidden Archives had become both a safeguard and a testament. They preserved knowledge across centuries, protected dangerous insights, and cultivated a lineage of scholars and initiates capable of interpreting their wisdom responsibly. They were dynamic, evolving entities, continuously replenished by discovery, collection, and the careful concealment of information. Their manuscripts were more than historical artifacts. They were instruments of intellectual and spiritual continuity, linking the past to the future, the known to the hidden, and the curious to the initiated. The archives remind us that history is never simply the sum of publicly recorded events. It is shaped as much by what was hidden, by what was preserved in shadows, and by the deliberate choices of those who understood the potential consequences of revelation. They are silent witnesses to the power of knowledge, the human drive to seek it, and the prudence required to protect it. They challenge us to consider not only what we know, but what we may never fully understand, and they stand as enduring symbols of the tension between curiosity and caution, revelation and concealment, the visible and the hidden. As the 18th century drew to a close, the Forbidden Archives had evolved into something more than a mere collection of hidden manuscripts. They had become living ecosystems of knowledge, carefully curated and fiercely guarded, spanning centuries, continents, and civilizations. These archives were not static. They were dynamic, constantly replenished by discoveries, acquisitions, and the careful concealment of dangerous information. Their custodians understood that certain knowledge, if revealed too soon, could ignite chaos, disrupt social order, or challenge deeply entrenched beliefs. Within these secret chambers, manuscripts were more than texts. They were keys to hidden worlds, portals to forbidden understanding, and instruments of power capable of shaping the course of history. The contents of these archives were astonishing in both scope and depth. Ancient texts, painstakingly preserved by monastic scribes, sat alongside Renaissance treatises, alchemical codices, mystical writings, and early scientific works. Historical manuscripts chronicled lost civilizations, secret lineages, and events deliberately omitted from mainstream narratives. Some texts hinted at technologies and knowledge that far exceeded contemporary understanding, while others revealed spiritual and philosophical insights so radical that their circulation had been deemed too dangerous for public exposure. Each manuscript carried the weight of centuries of preservation, a delicate balance between revelation and concealment maintained by generations of careful custodians. Alchemical texts of this era were particularly revered. They were no longer merely about the transformation of base metals into gold. They had evolved into complex treatises exploring the transformation of consciousness, the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment, and the ethical responsibilities inherent in the acquisition of knowledge. Their language was symbolic, their diagrams cryptic, their instructions layered in allegory. Only those initiated into the traditions could decode their meaning, navigating the labyrinthine instructions with care and discipline. These manuscripts demanded patience, intellect, and moral awareness. Their secrets were not merely information to be absorbed, but wisdom to be understood, internalized, and applied responsibly. Mystical and esoteric manuscripts were equally vital within the archives. Hermetic, Gnostic, and Kabbalistic texts explored hidden cosmologies, spiritual ascent, and the metaphysical forces governing the universe. They were intentionally layered in complexity, blending allegory, numerology, and symbolic language, so that only the discerning could access their deeper truths. The custodians of these works recognized that revelation without comprehension could be dangerous. A novice might misinterpret allegories, misunderstand symbolic instructions, or misuse spiritual insights, risking personal harm or social scandal. Therefore, access was restricted and learning was often guided, requiring mentorship, moral discernment, and intellectual maturity. Historical manuscripts were no less consequential. Chronicles, genealogies, and travel accounts preserved information deliberately excluded from public record. They often contradicted official narratives, revealing suppressed events, forgotten civilizations, or clandestine movements that had shaped societies in secret. Some manuscripts detailed the workings of secret societies, hidden dynasties, or powerful alliances, their contents threatening the legitimacy of contemporary rulers or institutions. The ability to interpret these texts demanded not only literacy, but a keen understanding of political, cultural, and philosophical nuance. In this way, the Forbidden Archives became a repository not just of knowledge, but of power, where secrets could influence empires, philosophies, and even the direction of human history. Scientific texts within the archives were equally remarkable. Early studies in astronomy, anatomy, medicine, engineering, and natural philosophy contained discoveries far ahead of their time. Astronomical treatises explored celestial mechanics that would later underpin Newtonian physics. Medical manuscripts revealed anatomy, surgery, and remedies unknown to contemporary practitioners. Engineering texts detailed mechanisms and machines that prefigured later technological advancements. Access to such manuscripts was carefully restricted. Their content could provoke accusations of heresy, challenge prevailing dogma, or attract the attention of authorities wary of disruptive ideas. Yet their careful preservation ensured that knowledge survived, poised to influence future generations once society was ready to receive it. Maps and charts gained extraordinary significance in this period, reflecting the expansion of exploration and commerce. Detailed maps of undiscovered continents, hidden harbors, and resource-rich regions were carefully encoded and circulated only among trusted navigators, rulers, and scholars. The wrong person gaining access to a single map could alter trade routes, influence territorial claims, or give a strategic advantage to a rival nation. These documents, like manuscripts, were both tools of knowledge and instruments of power. The archives became a network not merely of texts, but of influence, where geographic, political, and economic insights were preserved and protected with the same vigilance as spiritual or philosophical manuscripts. The circulation of knowledge within the forbidden archives relied on carefully constructed networks. Scholars, aristocrats, explorers, and initiates relied on coded correspondence, secret meetings, and trusted intermediaries to share manuscripts and ideas. Some texts were physically concealed within innocuous volumes, hidden in false compartments, or transported across borders to evade censorship. Marginal notes, diagrams, and symbolic language ensured that only those equipped with the training and insight necessary could understand the manuscript's full significance. Each transaction, each copy, and each act of preservation was imbued with responsibility, as the consequences of exposure could range from intellectual scandal to political upheaval. By the close of the 18th century, the forbidden archives had solidified their role as guardians of civilization's hidden knowledge. They were not relics of a bygone era. They were dynamic, evolving, and alive, connecting the wisdom of ancient civilizations with the discoveries, philosophies, and scientific advancements of the Enlightenment. Every manuscript, fragment, map, or diagram was a link in a chain stretching across centuries, preserving human curiosity while protecting it from misuse. These archives embody the delicate balance between curiosity and caution, revelation and suppression, knowledge and power. The archives also reveal a deeper truth about human history, that what is publicly recorded is only part of the story. What is hidden, preserved in shadow, and carefully guarded often shapes civilizations more profoundly than what is immediately visible. The forbidden archives are the silent witnesses to centuries of human ambition, curiosity, and caution. They challenge us to consider not only the knowledge we inherit, but also the knowledge that remains concealed, waiting for those capable of understanding its significance. Within these manuscripts lies the potential to reshape history, to illuminate hidden truths, and to reveal the continuity of human inquiry across generations. In this way, the forbidden archives serve as both a mirror and a map. They reflect the persistence of human curiosity and the desire to seek, preserve, and understand knowledge that may be too dangerous for ordinary consumption. They also chart a hidden history, a network of ideas, discoveries, and philosophies that connect the ancient world with the Enlightenment, forming a continuum of knowledge carefully curated, protected, and transmitted across centuries. To engage with these archives is to enter a world where every manuscript is alive with possibility, every text a gateway to understanding, and every revelation tempered by responsibility. The story of the forbidden archives at this moment in history is one of tension, vigilance, and enduring curiosity. It is a testament to the human desire to seek knowledge, tempered by the recognition that some truths are too powerful to be revealed recklessly. These archives were more than collections of texts. They were instruments of continuity, carefully maintained by generations who understood both the value and the danger of knowledge. Their existence reminds us that the pursuit of understanding is as much about restraint, patience, and discernment as it is about discovery. As the 19th century unfolded, the forbidden archives became even more vital as repositories of knowledge the world was not yet ready to confront. The era was defined by industrial expansion, rapid scientific discovery, and the rise of nation-states. Yet beneath the surface of progress lay a web of knowledge carefully guarded from public scrutiny. The manuscripts and codices hidden within these archives were no longer simply relics of the past. They were active instruments of influence, capable of shaping thought, policy, and even the course of history if their secrets were revealed prematurely. Custodians of these treasures understood that knowledge was power, and power, once exposed, could be uncontrollable. By this time, the archives had grown in both size and sophistication. Ancient texts detailing the wisdom of lost civilizations were carefully preserved alongside Renaissance treatises, mystical writings, early scientific texts, and complex alchemical codices. Each manuscript was deliberately layered with secrecy, whether through encoded language, symbolic diagrams, or physical concealment. Marginal notes offered subtle guidance, while allegorical narratives disguised the deeper meaning, ensuring that only those initiated into the tradition or willing to devote years of careful study could unlock their insights. Access was not simply a privilege. It was a test of intellect, discretion, and moral responsibility. Alchemical texts had evolved significantly by this period. They were no longer confined to instructions for the transmutation of metals. They explored metaphysical transformation, the refinement of consciousness, and the ethical use of knowledge. Symbols, geometric patterns, and allegorical illustrations created a multi-layered language that demanded both scholarly rigor and intuitive insight. A single misinterpretation could lead not only to failure, but to personal or spiritual peril. The custodians of these texts, often operating within secret societies or private scholarly networks, emphasized the moral dimension of knowledge. They understood that wisdom, like fire, could warm or destroy depending on how it was applied. Mystical and esoteric manuscripts were similarly protected. Hermetic, Gnostic, and Kabbalistic writings detailed hidden laws of the universe, spiritual ascent, and the profound interconnectedness of matter and spirit. These texts were intentionally dense, their true meaning accessible only to those capable of deep reflection and ethical discernment. Custodians often provided guidance through oral instruction, allegorical teaching, or coded marginalia, creating an environment in which learning was both a challenge and a responsibility. The manuscripts themselves became a kind of moral and intellectual crucible, testing the readiness of those who sought access to their secrets. Historical manuscripts offered revelations equally potent. Chronicles, genealogies, and travelogues preserved knowledge deliberately excluded from mainstream accounts. Some revealed clandestine alliances, secret lineages, or events suppressed to maintain political, religious, or social stability. Others hinted at lost technologies, hidden civilizations, or advanced understanding that predated modern science. These manuscripts were dangerous precisely because they challenged the accepted narrative of history, revealing that the world was far more complex than official accounts suggested. Scholars who engaged with these texts were often compelled to question authority, confront orthodoxy, and consider truths deliberately obscured by the passage of time and the machinations of power. The scientific texts within the archives continued to hold extraordinary importance. Works on astronomy, physics, medicine, and engineering often contain knowledge far ahead of contemporary understanding. Astronomical treatises described celestial mechanics long before they were widely accepted. Anatomical texts revealed insights into human physiology centuries ahead of mainstream medicine. Engineering manuscripts documented machines and devices that anticipated the industrial age. Access to these texts was tightly controlled, as their ideas could provoke controversy, challenge prevailing beliefs, or attract unwanted attention from authorities. Yet these works, preserved within secret collections, ensured that transformative knowledge survived to shape future generations. Maps and navigational documents became increasingly critical as exploration and global trade expanded. Hidden harbors, uncharted territories, and resource-rich regions were meticulously recorded in encoded charts, accessible only to trusted navigators, monarchs, or scholars. Such maps were powerful tools, capable of altering the balance of power between nations or conferring strategic advantage in commerce or warfare. These manuscripts exemplify the practical dimension of the Forbidden Archives, demonstrating that hidden knowledge was not purely philosophical or spiritual, but intimately tied to real-world influence and survival. The circulation of manuscripts in this period relied on complex, clandestine networks. Trusted intermediaries, secret meetings, and coded correspondence ensured that texts moved safely from one custodian to another. Manuscripts were hidden within innocuous books, stored in false compartments, or transported under the cover of secrecy. Marginalia, symbols, and allegorical passages protected the true meaning from casual observers, requiring initiation, skill, and patience to decode. Each act of sharing or preservation carried responsibility, reflecting the understanding that knowledge was simultaneously a treasure and a potential threat. By the 19th century, the Forbidden Archives were more than mere repositories. They were living systems of preservation and guidance. Each manuscript, fragment, and encoded document was a link in a chain connecting ancient civilizations, medieval scholars, Renaissance innovators, and Enlightenment thinkers. The archives were dynamic, continuously evolving as custodians acquired new texts, preserved endangered works, and maintained the integrity of hidden knowledge. They were a testament to humanity's drive to seek, protect, and transmit understanding across centuries. The Forbidden Archives also reveal the tension between revelation and concealment that has characterized the pursuit of knowledge throughout history. What is publicly accessible represents only a fraction of what has been preserved. The manuscripts hidden in vaults, private libraries, and secret chambers often contain the most powerful, transformative, or dangerous knowledge. They remind us that history is shaped not only by what is recorded openly, but by what is deliberately preserved, concealed, and protected from casual observation. The archives embody the delicate balance between curiosity and restraint, exploration and prudence, knowledge and responsibility. In the 19th century, the archives stood as both guardians and gateways. They preserved wisdom too dangerous, too radical, or too advanced for ordinary dissemination. Yet they also offered the possibility of revelation to those capable of understanding and responsibly applying it. Each manuscript was more than a relic. It was a living instrument, bridging the past with the present, guiding scholars, explorers, and initiates toward insights that could illuminate the world. The archive's influence, though largely invisible to the public, shaped thought, discovery, and philosophy, ensuring that critical knowledge survived the upheavals of history while awaiting the right moment for disclosure. The story of the Forbidden Archives in this period is one of vigilance, continuity, and the enduring human desire to seek understanding. They demonstrate that knowledge is never neutral. It carries consequences, responsibilities, and potential power. By preserving these manuscripts in secrecy, generations of custodians ensured that transformative ideas survived while remaining contained, creating a legacy that continues to intrigue, inspire, and challenge us today. In these hidden rooms, among manuscripts that whisper across centuries, the tension between curiosity and caution, revelation and concealment, is made tangible, inviting those who seek truth to approach with both reverence and responsibility. As the 20th century dawned, the Forbidden Archives had become more than mere collections of hidden manuscripts. They were living monuments to human curiosity, ambition, and the careful stewardship of knowledge. They spanned continents, linking monasteries, palaces, private libraries, and secret societies in a vast, shadowy network. The manuscripts contained within their walls were more than historical records. They were instruments of revelation, power, and influence. Some held the keys to forgotten civilizations, lost technologies, or radical philosophies that could challenge the foundation of modern thought. Others offered spiritual and metaphysical insights, encoded in layers of symbolism and allegory, designed to test the intellect, morality, and readiness of those who dare to engage with them. The early decades of the 20th century brought unprecedented change. Political upheavals, 2 world wars, and the rise and fall of empires created an environment in which the stakes of knowledge were higher than ever. Secrets that had been carefully preserved for centuries suddenly became dangerous commodities. Manuscripts detailing advanced technology, hidden histories, or esoteric teachings could be exploited for power, domination, or ideological warfare. The custodians of the forbidden archives, long accustomed to operating in shadows, faced new challenges, ensuring the preservation of knowledge amidst chaos, protecting manuscripts from destruction, and carefully controlling access to prevent misuse. Among the most coveted texts were those that contained knowledge long deemed too dangerous for general circulation. Alchemical treatises had evolved into complex philosophical systems, exploring the transformation of the human mind and spirit, the ethical use of power, and the hidden laws of the natural world. Their symbolism had grown increasingly intricate, employing geometric diagrams, allegorical narratives, and multi-layered codes. Only those with sufficient understanding and moral discernment could unlock their full meaning. Custodians emphasized that these manuscripts were less about instruction and more about initiation, a process of intellectual and spiritual refinement that required patience, reflection, and ethical responsibility. Mystical and esoteric manuscripts also reached unprecedented complexity. Hermetic, Gnostic, and Kabbalistic texts describe the interconnectedness of the cosmos, the influence of unseen forces, and the potential for human consciousness to access hidden realities. The most profound insights were deliberately obscured, encoded within allegories, symbolic language, and numerological patterns. The custodians of these manuscripts recognized that revelation without comprehension could be catastrophic. In the wrong hands, even a partially understood text could provoke fanaticism, misinterpretation, or social upheaval. As a result, access remained tightly controlled, often restricted to initiates who had undergone rigorous preparation and training. Historical manuscripts within the archives revealed narratives hidden from public record. They chronicled clandestine alliances, secret dynasties, suppressed revolutions, and events deliberately removed from mainstream accounts. Some texts hinted at forgotten civilizations, technologies lost to time, or knowledge so advanced it defied contemporary understanding. These documents were not merely records. They were instruments of power, capable of undermining official histories, challenging political legitimacy, or shifting the balance of knowledge in favor of those who could interpret them. Scholars who engaged with these texts were not simply reading history. They were entering a secret dialogue with the past, navigating truths that had been deliberately hidden for centuries. Scientific manuscripts were equally extraordinary. Early works on astronomy, physics, engineering, and medicine contained insights far beyond the mainstream understanding of the time. Astronomical treatises anticipated theories later confirmed by modern science. Anatomical texts described procedures centuries ahead of their era. Engineering manuscripts outlined machines and principles that would prefigure technological advancements decades, if not centuries, later. Such manuscripts were dangerous. Their ideas capable of disrupting prevailing paradigms, provoking skepticism, or even persecution. Yet within the archives, these texts were preserved, their knowledge safeguarded until the right moment for discovery and comprehension. Maps and navigational documents also remained highly prized. The age of global exploration had introduced new lands, resources, and strategic opportunities, and the manuscripts within the archives encoded this information carefully. Secret harbors, Uncharted territories and resource-rich regions were mapped in ways that could shift economic or political power. Only trusted navigators, rulers, and scholars were granted access, and the circulation of these maps was tightly controlled. They serve as a reminder that the Forbidden Archives were not merely philosophical or spiritual. They were practical, tangible instruments capable of altering real-world outcomes. The 20th century also saw the rise of modern institutions and technologies that threaten the secrecy of these archives. Libraries, universities, museums, and governments increasingly sought access to rare manuscripts for scholarship or political advantage. Wars and revolutions placed these treasures at risk of destruction, confiscation, or theft. In response, the custodians adapted, creating more secure networks, secret repositories, and coded systems of preservation. The archives became dynamic, evolving entities, maintaining their role as guardians of knowledge while responding to the unprecedented pressures of a rapidly changing world. The culmination of these centuries of concealment, preservation, and careful curation was a body of knowledge so potent that it could redefine human understanding. Within the deepest vaults lay manuscripts capable of revealing truths about lost civilizations, advanced technologies, esoteric philosophies, and spiritual realities that could challenge the very framework of modern thought. The archives were no longer merely repositories. They were thresholds, inviting only the prepared and the discerning to step across into realms of understanding that have been deliberately shielded from ordinary view. The journey through these texts was both intellectual and spiritual, a test of curiosity, courage, and ethical readiness. Ultimately, the Forbidden Archives of the 20th century stand as a testament to the enduring tension between revelation and concealment. They embody the human struggle to preserve knowledge while protecting it from misuse, to seek understanding while respecting its potential consequences. Every manuscript, map, or codex is a link in a chain that stretches across centuries, connecting ancient civilizations, medieval scholars, Renaissance polymaths, Enlightenment innovators, and modern custodians. They remind us that knowledge is never neutral. It carries responsibility, power, and risk. The archives are both mirrors and maps, reflecting the human desire for discovery while charting hidden pathways of thought, innovation, and insight. They show that history is shaped as much by what is concealed as by what is revealed, and that the pursuit of knowledge requires caution, discernment, and reverence. Within the secret chambers, manuscripts whisper across centuries, bridging the past and the present, the known and the hidden, the visible and the invisible. Each text is alive with possibility, offering insights that can enlighten, challenge, or transform, but only to those capable of understanding and respecting its power. The story of the Forbidden Archives in this period is one of tension, vigilance, and anticipation. Custodians navigated the delicate balance between secrecy and revelation, preserving knowledge while waiting for the world to be ready. They safeguarded truths that, if revealed too soon, could have caused social upheaval, political destabilization, or intellectual chaos. And yet, they maintained hope that these manuscripts would eventually fulfill their purpose, to illuminate, to guide, and to expand human understanding when the time was right. The archives, in their silent grandeur, stand as enduring monuments to human curiosity, wisdom, and the careful stewardship of knowledge that transcends time. As the 20th century progressed and the modern era unfolded, the significance of the Forbidden Archives took on new dimensions. They were no longer simply repositories of hidden manuscripts. They had become symbols of humanity's unending quest for understanding, the silent guardians of knowledge that the world was not yet ready to confront. The rise of mass communication, global conflict, and rapid technological advancement made the preservation of such texts both more urgent and more precarious. Each manuscript, codex, or map represented centuries of careful curation, painstaking concealment, and the judgment of those who understood both the power and the danger inherent in knowledge. To touch a page was to encounter the weight of human history, a fragile balance of revelation and restraint maintained over generations. The contents of the Forbidden Archives remained astonishingly diverse. They encompassed alchemical treatises exploring the transformation of consciousness, mystical texts describing the hidden structures of the cosmos, historical manuscripts chronicling suppressed or forgotten events, and scientific works far ahead of their time. Some manuscripts contained insights into technologies or philosophies that, if revealed prematurely, could have destabilized political, social, or religious structures. Others held profound spiritual wisdom, accessible only to those who could interpret symbolism, understand allegory, and exercise discernment. Together, they formed a web of hidden knowledge that had persisted through centuries of upheaval, warfare, censorship, and intellectual change. Alchemical and esoteric texts in the archives were particularly potent. They continued to explore both material and metaphysical transformation, employing intricate symbolism, coded diagrams, and allegorical storytelling. A single manuscript might appear at first glance as a chaotic collection of drawings, geometric patterns, and cryptic Latin or Greek inscriptions, but for the initiated, it offered pathways to wisdom, understanding, and ethical insight. Custodians emphasized that these manuscripts were not merely manuals of instruction. They were tools of initiation, designed to test patience, intellect, and moral awareness. The knowledge they contained was transformative, but could only be safely unlocked by those prepared to carry its weight. Mystical manuscripts, including Hermetic, Gnostic, and Kabbalistic works, remained tightly controlled. These texts explored the fundamental principles of existence, the hidden forces shaping reality, and the potential for human consciousness to interact with the unseen. Their language was deliberately complex, embedding layers of meaning within allegory, numerology, and symbolic imagery. Custodians recognized that partial understanding could be dangerous, leading to misinterpretation, obsession, or even harm. Access was therefore restricted, with learning often guided through mentorship, commentary, or careful instruction. The manuscripts themselves were both a test and a gift, revealing their truths only to those capable of receiving them responsibly. Historical manuscripts within the archives offered some of the most tantalizing insights. They chronicled events deliberately excluded from mainstream accounts, including suppressed revolutions, secret alliances, forgotten lineages, and encounters with lost civilizations. Some texts hinted at knowledge or technologies that had vanished, offering tantalizing glimpses of civilizations more advanced than their contemporaries or societies whose achievements were erased by the passage of time. These manuscripts were dangerous because they challenged established narratives, potentially destabilizing power structures and social orders. They required careful interpretation, discernment, and a willingness to confront truths long obscured by secrecy and history. Scientific manuscripts preserved within the archives were equally remarkable. Works on astronomy, anatomy, engineering, and physics contained knowledge that anticipated discoveries decades or centuries ahead of their time. They challenged orthodoxies, provoked debate, and occasionally placed their custodians at risk of persecution or marginalization. Yet their preservation ensured continuity, allowing ideas to survive the tumult of war, political upheaval, and societal change. In the hands of the right minds, these texts could catalyze revolutions in thought, spark innovations, or reveal truths previously considered impossible. The archives were, in essence, incubators of human potential, carefully shielded from misuse while awaiting the arrival of those capable of comprehension. Maps and navigational documents continued to play a crucial role. The expansion of global trade, exploration, An empire made hidden knowledge of geography, resources, and strategic locations immensely valuable. Encoded maps, secret charts, and hidden annotations preserved in the archives allowed select individuals to access information that could shift political and economic power. Unlike the purely intellectual or spiritual manuscripts, these documents demonstrated the tangible, real-world influence of the Forbidden Archives. Knowledge here was both theoretical and practical, a bridge between ideas and action, philosophy and power. The 20th century also brought unprecedented threats and challenges to the preservation of these texts. Wars, revolutions, and the rise of authoritarian regimes placed manuscripts at risk of destruction, confiscation, or misuse. Technological advancements made copying and disseminating information faster than ever, increasing the potential for exposure. In response, the custodians of the archives adapted, creating more secure repositories, hidden chambers, and complex systems of coded communication. They maintained the delicate balance between safeguarding the knowledge and allowing controlled access to those capable of understanding it, ensuring that the archives could survive and continue their silent influence on human thought. The Forbidden Archives, in this period, also reflected a profound understanding of the responsibility inherent in knowledge. Custodians knew that revelation without readiness could lead to chaos, and concealment without purpose could be equally perilous. Manuscripts were more than historical artifacts. They were instruments of ethical, intellectual, and spiritual stewardship. They reminded those who engaged with them that knowledge carries consequences and that wisdom requires discernment, patience, and humility. The archives were as much about preserving human potential as preserving texts, offering a testament to the careful balance between curiosity and caution, power and responsibility. Ultimately, the 20th century Forbidden Archives served as both mirrors and maps. They reflected the enduring human desire for discovery, understanding, and mastery of hidden truths, while charting pathways through which knowledge could safely flow across generations. They preserved not only the intellectual achievements of the past, but the ethical frameworks necessary to apply them responsibly. In doing so, they ensured that knowledge, no matter how dangerous or transformative, could endure, offering its treasures to those capable of comprehending their depth and significance. The story of the Forbidden Archives during this period is one of vigilance, foresight, and careful stewardship. They demonstrate that history is shaped as much by what is hidden as by what is revealed, that the most powerful knowledge is often preserved in shadow, and that the pursuit of understanding requires a delicate balance between exploration and restraint. As the century progressed, these archives continued to whisper across time, connecting past, present, and future, offering secrets to those prepared to listen, and maintaining the legacy of human curiosity, wisdom, and the eternal quest to uncover what has been deliberately concealed. The Forbidden Archives, after centuries of concealment, preservation, and careful stewardship, stand today as silent witnesses to the persistent tension between revelation and secrecy, curiosity and caution, knowledge and power. They are more than repositories of manuscripts, maps, and codices. They are living chronicles of human ambition, intellect, and the moral responsibilities that accompany understanding. Within their shadowed chambers lie secrets capable of reshaping philosophy, science, spirituality, and history itself. To walk through these archives is to step across the threshold of human consciousness, where every manuscript is a key, every marginal note a guide, and every symbol a doorway into a deeper understanding of our world. As the modern era unfolded, the archives were increasingly threatened by exposure, neglect, and the accelerating pace of technological change. Digital reproduction, mass publication, and global communication presented both opportunities and risks. Knowledge that had been carefully shielded for centuries could suddenly become accessible to the uninitiated, raising the stakes for custodians who understood the consequences of premature revelation. The challenge was no longer simply physical preservation. It was the maintenance of contextual understanding, ethical guidance, and the selective transmission of insight. The archives had to evolve, adapting to new forms of guardianship, blending ancient methods of concealment with modern strategies of secure dissemination. Within these walls, alchemical and esoteric texts continued to test and guide the seekers who approached them. These manuscripts, layered with symbolism, diagrams, and allegory, offered lessons not only in hidden sciences, but in ethics, self-discipline, and spiritual awareness. They were designed to be decoded gradually, revealing insights only when the reader had demonstrated patience, intellectual rigor, and moral readiness. The custodians understood that knowledge alone was insufficient. Wisdom, the ability to apply insight responsibly, was paramount. These manuscripts were as much mirrors of the reader's character as they were repositories of secret information, reflecting readiness to understand, restraint to wield, and discernment to apply. Mystical manuscripts, including Hermetic, Gnostic, and Kabbalistic works, remained among the most tightly controlled. They described the subtle structures of the cosmos, the hidden forces shaping human existence, and pathways for spiritual and intellectual ascent. The texts were intentionally complex, embedding layers of meaning in allegorical storytelling, numerology, and symbolic illustration. Custodians recognized that partial or careless interpretation could be dangerous, not only intellectually, but spiritually and socially. Access required careful preparation, mentorship, and a commitment to ethical engagement. The manuscripts, in this sense, were both guides and guardians, revealing secrets only to those capable of understanding their depth and implications. Historical manuscripts offered perspectives that challenged mainstream narratives. Chronicles, genealogies, travelogues, and secret records preserved knowledge deliberately omitted from public history. They documented hidden alliances, suppressed events, forgotten civilizations, and technologies lost to time. These manuscripts were powerful precisely because they contradicted accepted accounts, suggesting that what is publicly recorded is often incomplete or manipulated. Scholars who approached these texts were not merely reading the past. They were entering a hidden dialogue with it, confronting truths that had been deliberately obscured and engaging with the consequences of revelation. The archives thus became instruments not only of preservation, but of insight, allowing select individuals to reinterpret the tapestry of history itself. Scientific manuscripts within the archives preserved ideas that often anticipated modern understanding by centuries. Astronomical treatises, anatomical studies, engineering designs, and natural philosophy works documented discoveries far ahead of their time. These texts could provoke controversy, disrupt orthodoxy, and challenge the assumptions of the day. Yet within the controlled environment of the archives, knowledge was protected, allowed to survive without being misused. These manuscripts reflect the dual nature of the archives. They were simultaneously preservers of progress and guardians against chaos. They ensured continuity of discovery, allowing transformative ideas to influence future generations when society was ready to comprehend them. Maps and navigational charts retained a tangible influence. The age of global exploration had revealed new lands, trade routes, and resources, yet knowledge of these was carefully encoded and restricted. Secret maps preserved in the archives could alter political, economic, or military landscapes if accessed by the wrong hands. Their significance demonstrates that the archives were not merely intellectual or spiritual repositories. They were practical instruments of power, capable of shaping real-world outcomes. They remind us that hidden knowledge has always carried consequences, whether in the form of strategic advantage, economic opportunity, or ideological leverage. The 20th and 21st centuries have introduced new complexities. Global conflict, mass information, and technological connectivity have made the preservation of secrecy increasingly challenging. Yet the principles of the archives remain consistent. Knowledge carries responsibility, wisdom requires discernment, and revelation without readiness is perilous. Manuscripts are preserved not for the sake of secrecy alone, but to ensure that understanding unfolds in a way that respects the potential consequences of its application. The archives have adapted, balancing the demands of preservation, security, and the selective sharing of insight to ensure their legacy endures. Ultimately, the Forbidden Archives are a testament to the enduring human struggle to balance curiosity and caution, revelation and concealment. They embody the knowledge that history is shaped as much by what is hidden as by what is revealed. They preserve the insights of civilizations long past, the discoveries of pioneers and visionaries, and the ethical frameworks necessary for the responsible application of knowledge. In doing so, they offer a lesson that transcends time. Knowledge alone is not enough. It must be tempered with understanding, discernment, and respect for its consequences. The archives invite us to reflect on our own engagement with knowledge. They challenge us to consider what we seek, why we seek it, and how we apply what we learn. Each manuscript is more than a text. It is a guide, a mirror, and a guardian. Every symbol, marginal note, and diagram is a doorway to insight, but also a reminder that wisdom demands responsibility. The Forbidden Archives do not simply reveal truths. They cultivate readiness, discernment, and ethical understanding, shaping not only what we know, but how we integrate that knowledge into the broader fabric of human life. As we step back from the hidden corridors of these archives, we recognize that they are living legacies. They have survived wars, revolutions, and the relentless passage of time, carrying with them the accumulated wisdom and caution of countless generations. They stand as monuments to the delicate balance between knowledge and power, revelation and discretion, curiosity and restraint. The Forbidden Archives remind us that history is never fully known, that every revelation comes with responsibility, and that the pursuit of understanding is a journey demanding both courage and prudence. In their quiet, shadowed grandeur, the archives whisper across centuries, connecting the seekers of the past with the thinkers of the present and the explorers of the future. They offer glimpses of knowledge that could illuminate the deepest mysteries of history, science, and human consciousness. They challenge us to approach learning with reverence, patience, and ethical mindfulness. And perhaps most importantly, they remind us that the most profound truths are often hidden, waiting for those who are prepared to seek them with care, respect, and discernment. In this, the Forbidden Archives are not merely collections of manuscripts. They are enduring symbols of the human quest for knowledge, the responsibilities that accompany it, and the timeless tension between revelation and concealment.